this meeting right now with the entrance of Senator Brandon Lamont Beach. We can begin. A couple of you reached out to me, a couple members of the committee, and asked if we could have Commissioner McMurray back to kind of talk through the broad transportation plan. And I know there's a couple of specific questions in the room about different regions and areas of the state. So Commissioner, if you could come forward, would love you to take us through what you prepared, and then I think we'll probably have a number of questions. So if you could keep that in mind as you're walking us through that you are a popular man, and I think a lot of people want to know what's going on projects in their district. So thanks for being here with us. Thank you for being flexible. I know we're 2.5 hours out of the window of when you plan to be here. I know that we also had you before our subcommittee last Friday. It was your wife's birthday, and we had to get you out of there. Did you all have a good dinner?
We did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Let me turn your mic up, and you can take it away.
It won't be so easy.
All right. Yes. All right, Senator Lucas, so off to the start. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the flexibility you did afford me last time at the subcommittee, which was Senator Probst, and today my intent is to walk through in a little more detail the components of the budget for Amendment 24, but really the why. What's important, why these revenues that are added to our budget are so important, and how we plan to execute on that. But I knew I couldn't outsmart this committee, so I want to recognize two important people. If we have two of our State Transportation Board members here with us today, Ms. Stacy Key from the mighty 5th District, and Kirk Thompson, who served in the Senate from the 7th Congressional District. So I'd like to just recognize them. And
Thank you all for being here.
So when it gets to those easy questions, maybe I'll call them up and phone a friend, get some help. So we'll just jump in. You got the presentation in front of you. As always, I just remind everybody that our budget is comprised of really 4 fund sources. The largest is that of excise or motor fuel tax. And then if you look at the middle of this slide, there's 3 components that constitute the Transportation Trust Fund. The annual alternative vehicle fee, or EV fee, and most people don't think about that, but we actually do have an EV fee here in Georgia. So those people that have EVs are contributing to fund transportation. We have an annual vehicle heavy impact fee and a hotel fee. And I'm remind you that those 3 things came about back in 2015 under HB 170, where we were looking and had made the case that we needed to put at least $1 billion more into the budget to take on the state of good repair, such as repairing roads and bridges and safety and those things. So that was the genesis of the Transportation Trust Fund. And then next you'll see the Transit Trust Fund, which is the ride share or user fee. So 50 cents if you're in a ride share here. If you split the ride share with somebody else, it's 25 cents per person. And those dollars go straight to transit. That's the only use they can be used for statutorily. And let me back up just a minute too. On the Transportation Trust Fund, statutorily, up to 10% of those dollars can be allocated to transit, but at least 90% have to be appropriated and used for surface transportation because it was part of that HB 170, state of good repair for roads, bridges, etc. So just a little bit of background on those. And last is general funds. And I usually say, well, general funds are usually the smallest part of our budget, but not so in Amendment 24, where the governor recognized the $1.5 billion of state general funds into our budget. What general funds traditionally were used for was for airport aid, for our rail program, or for our waterways program, which are usually smaller buckets. But before we jump into a little bit deeper, I want to take a moment and really sort of share with you sort of the state of the cost of doing business and why this recognized $1.5 billion in our budget is so critical. So on the next slide, which is slide 3, you'll see this complex chart. And I want us to take just a minute to go into this. You'll get some kind of credit for being an economist when we finish this slide. But this slide comes from the Federal Highway Administration, and it is called the National Highway Construction Cost Index, which is the red line. And the red line basically is a historical look back by quarter of actual cost of doing highway or surface transportation construction. So the Federal Highway goes through and looks at the major commodities like steel and aggregate and asphalt and concrete and electrical wiring and all the major components that go into delivering a transportation project. And what this chart is just an overlay of several indexes, one being CPI, which is sort of the blue line of which we all equate to inflation, is the Consumer Price Index. The green line is the Power Producer Index, so everything it relates to generation of energy and cost. And the sort of the smallest line there, the lowest line there in yellow, sort of hard to see, is the Employment Cost Index. So all these indices, be it CPI and PPI, ECI, and NHCCI, have been basically put on the same scale, okay? So don't worry too much about the left side, because you're gonna say, well, CPI is much greater than 2.3% or what have you. Yes, it is, but it's basically putting all these things relatively together and comparing it. And so what this really shows you is that the cost of doing business for transportation is outpacing CPI, and even now is outpaced the Power Producer Index. So it's a little bit of a lagging. You can see that CPI goes to Q2, almost Q3 of 2023, where we're still sort of getting data from the Federal Highway into 2022. So the point of this complex graph is just to show you that nationally, the cost of doing transportation projects is exceeding even CPI and some of the relatively things we think about of consumer, purchases and what have you. There's a great report by ENO, which is a transportation think tank, that takes a deeper dive into this and looks at many factors. And PPI, the Power Producer Index, and ECI has some components of the increased cost because it takes energy to manufacture concrete and aggregate and things like that. And obviously labor is labor, so labor drives cost as well. So just a little bit of deeper dive at the national level. So let's take a deeper dive and come right here to Georgia. Let me take a moment to explain this chart because I'm going to have several charts here. If you look up the left side, you'll see dollars. If you look across the bottom, you're going to see basically every 6 months of bidding information. Going back to December 2020, this is bids we received. The blue line is actually the low bid. So the highway contractors are in competitive bidding environment and we take the lowest responsible bid as the winner. And the red line is our engineer's estimate. So our chief engineer has a small office of engineers that basically each month bid our projects. So they're just like the contractors. They're calling and asking for material pricing. They look at labor, they look at cost, they look at fuel, and they're trying to generate the same cost estimate just like our contractors do. And so we always want to be, in close alignment to make sure that, the state is getting a responsible bid. So if you look at this chart represents the cost of resurfacing one lane of roadway for 1 mile in length. So one 12-foot lane, 1 mile in length. And if you look from the left to the right, you can see that's an 80% increase in cost, a little over $150,000 to resurface one lane, 1 mile. So 2 lanes, which you think about a 2-lane road, now you're at over $300,000 a mile. I like to think about it, if you laid 3 $20 bills down every foot, you'll be just about right. That's about what it costs to resurface a road. 3 $20 bills every foot. So that's sort of the cost of doing business. So you can see, again, about an 80% increase. On the next slide, this one is even a little more staggering, is if you look from the left to the right, this is urban widening. So think in metropolitan areas, cities where we take a 2-lane road and expand it to a 4-lane road. So this is what we call urban widening, not a rural area, but in a city or urban area. And as you look from the left to right, you can see a 118% increase in those costs on a per mile basis. So now, this goes to October 2023, It's about 19 million a mile to widen 1 mile of road. This is exclusive of right-of-way. This is just the cost of construction to widen the road. Now, we took bids in December for a project in North Fulton County from Alpharetta right up to the Forsyth County line. That project came in at an average of $20.4 million a mile. So it just shows you that things have pretty much stabilized, but that's a pretty big cost. And also the urban area, we're seeing the right-of-way costs being very commensurate with the construction costs. So you're between right-of-way and construction, you may be, easily 30 to 40 million a mile. So pretty big numbers there. Okay, next slide. This is bridges. Again, looking back to December 2020, and this is just the bridge. So we take a bridge deck, the part that you drive on, and divide it into $1 per square foot, just like you do in home building. You talk about $1 per square to build a house. We use $1 per square for building bridges. And you can see that since December 2020, it's increased by 61%, tracking a little bit above $240, almost $250 a square foot for just the bridge. That doesn't include the roadway, the guardrails, and the embankments that approach the bridge. That's just taking the bridge cost that we've bid and see that. So I'll show you this just to show you what that trajectory has been for increased cost. I might add too, this is my last chart of this and of this nature, but I would add that we built a lot of roundabouts, which are very efficient and very safe. Roundabouts have increased by about 114% going back to 2020, and now average about $3.4 million per roundabout. Where when we started this long ago, we were saying, hey, $1 million roundabout, that's all it took. So tremendous cost increase there as well. Okay, so that's sort of the state of the state of...
Commissioner, this may or may not be the best thing to do. I'm going to there's a member that has a question. I may pause you in real time just so we don't get 20 pages in and have to come back. So, Senator McLaurin.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for this overview. On the subject of roundabouts, this is not a conversation I've heard at Capitol yet, but, it used to be there was sort of a John Birch angle, like fluorine in the water type worries about, becoming a European socialist state if we use roundabouts, right? I will say on a serious note that I have had some issues just driving personally where I have seen that people don't exactly know how to use the roundabouts, think that if they let one car go that somehow it's their turn, or something like that, right? Instead of the traffic coming from the left. Do y'all do any sort of education on roundabouts? Is there are there materials out there for people that are at least available? Because I've seen it enough where drivers get upset at each other. And I think that they are the most efficient solution for so many of these cases, but how's the education effort on that?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yes, yield means yield. So when you approach those, you gotta make sure for oncoming traffic. We do a lot of outreach, especially when we're deploying a roundabout at a specific location, and including we have a tabletop exercise with Matchbox cars that show you how you drive through that. We have a great computer simulation, but we've also partnered with Department of Driver Services to make sure that they have information in their driver handbook so that as our younger drivers are getting that they do have that opportunity to understand these sort of different type of intersections.
Thank you for that.
Chairman Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I know there's very strict rules when right-of-way is being acquired with federal dollars. Is there anything we could do with state dollar only projects to encourage developers to donate right-of-way? I'll give you an example of West Side Parkway where Avalon was. They donated that land. They knew how important that road was. If that road's not built, their development really doesn't make it in the way they want it. So they donated that property because we were using state funds. Do we have any programs that would encourage or could help? Because right-of-way is, and at least in my district, it's half the cost in a lot of projects.
Yes, sir. Chairman Beaches, state dollars afford us a little more flexibility and things like that. Federally, you have to extend a fair market value offer to a person, even if they're going to if they say, hey, I want to donate my property, we still have to go through the appraisal process and extend that offer. State dollars allow a little more flexibility, but they're very similar. The process of purchasing property or the ultimate use of eminent domain are very similar, state and federal. But there is a little more flexibility on the state side.
All right, Senator Lucas.
How does Florida do it? My understanding, they're able to get things done a lot quicker than us. And basically, that federal money goes basically in to replace the state monies that they put in prior to a project. Now, I do understand that they have a portion of real estate sales goes to DOT too. But I'm trying to figure out how do they get away with doing it when you get down to Orlando and you see the roadways and stuff, those were done with state dollars prior to the feds even putting a dollar in.
So, thank you for that question. So Florida has a robust, state budget, and I believe their base budget is around 10 billion a year. As you will get to the next slide here, you'll see our budget in 24 with $1.5 billion is about 4 billion. So they utilize a lot of their state dollars on their capital projects, capital expansion projects like you referenced. And then they take their federal money and do the maximum they can with state of good repair, maintenance, and things like that. So they have a bigger state-funded capital program percentage-wise than what we have here in Georgia. And then what you see in Orlando, especially on I-4, there was a big public-private partnership project. And I really don't remember the fund source, but it was truly a public-private partnership where they relied on the private sector to finance and fund a lot of that. And we'll have express lanes on part of that I-4. But when you get in Orlando, there's a lot of work there, as well as a lot of other toll lanes, express lanes and toll systems in and around Orlando.
So that $10 billion number you referenced, that's analogous to our typical 2.3 billion. So they're
That's
4x.
correct.
They're 4x, more than 4x the spend with double the population. I know that they did a similar thing that we've done here with the 1.5 billion, where Governor DeSantis put some infrastructure, additional ARPA funds or surplus funds. What was that number?
4 billion.
Okay. One last question, then we got to let him get through these slides. Chairman Burns.
Thank you. Just a quick clarification, roundabout cost is old cost was roughly $1 million roundabout, is that right?
Going back to,
Going
yeah,
back to
2018 or so.
2018, and today it is
A little over 3.
more over 3. So you're seeing a threefold increase in
That's correct.
that cost. Thank you.
Help us understand, because what input costs are driving this? I mean, if even if we say inflation is high at 20%, and labor isn't 300% increase in that amount of time. Is it the aggregate cost that we're seeing drive that, or what are you seeing drive that?
Overall commodity pricing. And listen, this is, we've got great Georgia contractors provide. They are in a competitive bid environment, but this is just the cost of doing business. It's all the inputs, aggregates. Asphalt is petroleum based and driven, so sort of whatever the barrel of oil does, there's ups and downs with that. A lot of energy into manufacturing all these materials, manufacturing cement, making concrete. So just all the raw materials and everything that goes into that. As I talked about on that graph with the construction commodity index, there's a lot of components to that: energy, labor, and just raw materials as well.
Yeah, I guess oil and energy are 200 to 300% increase in that
components
amount of
of
time.
that.
All right, get back to your budget.
Okay.
We'll get back on track.
No, that's great. Great conversation. This is just, again, the amended FY24. I've updated this to reflect the House changes. So, again, can't say enough thank yous to the governor for recognizing 1.5 billion additional dollars. You can see those stow up with state general fund. On this chart, you see excise. The increase in excise is due to Department of Revenue audits and interest earnings on motor fuel. So that was the add. And I might add that the 2.18 billion of motor fuel is made whole too from when excise was being stopped, or wasn't being collected rather. We have been made whole. I get that question a lot. So our budget is whole from the base, and then a $1.5 billion add as well. So let's look at how we're going to deploy these dollars. And again, this is representative of the House change to Amendment 24. I always like to show this chart. This is where the dollars are going to use. The bar chart on the left is capital projects, which consist of 3 of our budget programs: capital construction, capital maintenance, and local roads administration. That's the 3 basic ones, plus we have the new freight program, of which I will speak to later. And I know this committee has heard from Janine Miller, our planning director, about freight in a previous meeting, but I'll take a little deeper dive into that. Next, you see a routine maintenance at $528 million roughly. That routine maintenance is taking care of our house. This is like changing the oil in your car and keeping your roof up on your house. Routine maintenance is taking care of our roadways and roadsides, making sure the state of good repair, repairing guardrails, signs, reflectors, and all those kind of things. General operations here is where a lot of our people are. This consists of several budget programs. Overall, GDOT administration is one, but also program delivery. So the people that are doing the work to deliver the projects, environmental folks, right-of-way folks, engineers, people like that. It also has our planning division, which does the planning, and it also has our data collections folks, which actually keep a lot of our data, roadside information, and inventory, which is required federally for federal reporting. LMIG is the Local Maintenance Improvement Grant. We'll talk about that in deeper detail. We have GO debt. Our bond debt actually went up just a tad due to interest rates going up at $109 million. Intermodal, I'll take a little deeper dive into that. And then in payments to SRTA, which is the State Road and Tollway Authority, the lion's share of that is paying debt. They hold our federal debt service, and so that's what that is there. And then payments to ATL is the Atlanta Transit Link Authority, which is an attached agency. So this is sort of where the dollars are being deployed. And I think the important thing to look at is when you really look at capital projects, routine maintenance, and then LMIG, those are dollars out the door that are doing things on the roadway. Everything else is either supporting the operations or getting projects ready to go out the door. All right, so just a deeper dive into the budget itself. In airport aid, the House did redistributed $27 million out of the freight program into airport aid, bringing it to about $53.3 million. Airport aid, as I said earlier, is funded through general funds, so this is part of where that general fund money came from. We use these dollars to match Federal Aviation Administration dollars. We are called a block grant state from the Federal Aviation Administration, so based on that, Georgia receives about $46 million from the Federal Aviation Administration that then we partner with local airports in the state on a 90% federal, 5% local, 5% state partnership to advance airport aid projects, as well as we have a state-funded airport aid project as well. Now, to give you some basis of what does $53.3 million look like compared to previously, this next slide really shows you what our trajectory has been on for airport aid. There was a joint study committee just a few years ago, I guess back into 2020 now, time goes by in a hurry, focused on airport investment. And so you can see that since 2022, we've continued to make significant investments in our airports around the state. We always have more applications from local airports than we have funding for. We had over 350 in 24 and about a little over 400 applications in 2025 as we were looking ahead. But that's the history of airport investment. Next, in the budget was a line item with $659 million of state general fund money to provide funds to expedite the department's existing project pipeline. So I bolded the word existing, because and this again, our existing projects, because for every time I come over here, I have a longer list when I leave of other projects that need to be done. So let me share with you in just a moment of why this is important for our existing projects. And on this next slide, which is, I believe, slide 12, it may not have a number on it, but it is slide 12. Let me walk you through this little table, because this is the way we have to operate. So we have to be physically constrained each year with our project list. That is a federal requirement. And so we start with, and we have a 4-year physically constrained plan. So we develop projects based on physical constraint in each year. And then as we have cost estimate updates, and with this sort of upswing we've seen, if you're physically constrained and your project cost goes up, that means projects have to move to the next year. So we have this sort of cascading effect as we are, a zero-sum game. As project costs go up, we're financially constrained, projects move into the next year. And then if you add another project, if you say, hey, we need to advance this new project, well, you've got to find room for that. And if you don't have room for it, something else slides out. And there's always things that happen too. Every now and then an endangered species like a bat shows up and we have to slow some projects down and shift them a year or two while we look for bats and things like that. I'm not kidding about that. And so, but you can just see this is sort of the logic that happens. And that's why this $659 million is very important, to deal with those increased costs I just showed you in those first slides, so that we can keep projects in the current fiscal year being amended 24, but also have the ability to maybe slide projects that had got shifted to the right on the chart back to the left. And Senator Lucas, I think of a great example like that is, and I'll talk about this in the freight one, but it falls into the freight bucket, but it's 1675 in Macon, where we have the last phase is sitting in fiscal year 28 right now. But this would be the ability that we could slide that up sooner and get it done sooner rather than later. So there's some other. What's that?
When you slide up, you're able to cut the cost of the project.
Nothing ever gets any cheaper. Absolutely. Nothing ever gets any cheaper. There's some other complexity here too, because, we get asked, well, what list of projects is this going to be? And we're actively working on that. The director of planning and her team's working on that, and our folks, our chief engineer and our folks in delivery are working with them to work on these lists of what can we move forward? What can we make sure we do this year? And then what can we move forward? But let me give you one more little complexity that exists, is if a project has federal dollars on it, and to Chairman Beach's point, and we can accelerate it with state dollars, I freed up some federal dollars in some budget year that has to be physically constrained. And the federal dollars are not one flavor of federal dollars. The federal dollars come in multiple buckets, some 13 or more buckets. So we have to sort of do a dance, and I call it a little bit more like checkers than chess. Is when we move this project forward, we just created an opportunity in a year that may be a year or two away, and then we match a project up to it with the right fund source that it's in the right bucket. So we have to be a little bit strategic. So it's a little bit harder than just saying here's some projects to do, because this actually has a very positive compounding effect that won't only help us in this year, it'll help us in 25 and 26, but may have an effect in 27, 28, or even later as we move projects up and to the left. So a very complex situation, especially with the federal, and I won't get into too deep in the federal, but there are positive consequences that we need to think about when we advance projects. And let me move very quickly to this next slide. The House moved $100 million, or redistributed $100 million out of the freight program into the capital maintenance. And capital maintenance is resurfacing and reconstruction of existing pavements, rehab of bridges, if you have to rehabilitate a bridge, and then striping and reflectors. And like this morning, we needed stripes and reflectors on the road when it was pouring down rain. So that's what capital maintenance project does. We take our state funds and then leverage to the, sort of like Florida, we try to leverage most of the federal funds we can with capital maintenance program, because there's a less of a burden through the environmental process and less of a burden through the right-of-way process to move those federal dollars quicker. And so we try to do that. So just a little bit of why the $100 million was put in is this next chart that shows the history of our capital maintenance resurfacing program. So let me take just a moment to explain this. The column on the left, sort of that peach orange color, is how many resurfacing projects we bid in a fiscal year. The next column is how many centerline miles of pavement that represents. So a centerline mile is just 1 mile. It doesn't matter how many lanes it is. So this comparison of the blue is a little bit oranges and tangerines, because we're just talking about how many miles did we pave. And then the last number in green is the cost. That was the actual cost. So if you look at 2021, we invested $379 million in resurfacing and did 889 miles. In 2024, this year, year to date, we've invested $352 million and have 463 miles to show for it. So not quite half the distance at almost the same cost. That goes back to that 60% increase I showed you. So this allows us to, the House recommendation of adding $100 million absolutely helps us to take care of our pavements. There's an old adage of the 10% rule when it comes to resurfacing roads, is you want to resurface each road about once every 10 years. That's sort of the life cycle of asphalt. So we have, if you resurface every mile of road once every 10 years, you get 10% of your system a year, basically. So 10% of our system is about 1,800 miles a year that we would need to do if we did 10% of our system and you touched 1 mile of road once every 10 years. Now, we get actually more pavement life than 10 years through rehabilitation, through preventative maintenance, so we can stretch that out some. But 463 miles or less than 500 miles is, that's getting to be a challenge. So that was the reason for the House moving $100 million toward that. Next is local maintenance improvement grant. So on slide 15, this is the formula dollars that go out to cities and counties based on a formula based on population and how many miles of roads that city or county may have in comparison to the entire state. And so LMIG is based on, this budget is based on 10% of the excise tax collection number. And so that's what the $218.5 million represents. Originally in the governor's budget, there was $200 million in state general funds in the LMIG program. And that requires when the LMIG program is established in Title 32, that says LMIG is what the program it is, and that between 10 and 20% of excise is appropriated to LMIG each year. Then separately, in Title 48, back when the TIA regions were established back in 2010 to 2012, when the referendum was, there was a provision in Title 48 that says if you pass a regional T-SPLOST, or TIA as we called it, then the state match for LMIG was 10%. If you didn't pass it, the state match for LMIG is 30%. And so when the money's appropriated in LMIG, interpretation of those two laws say that then there's a match required between 10% or 30%, depending on what city and county you are. So the House actually moved the $200 million from the state general funds from LMIG into this other budget program, which is on the bottom of the screen, called Local Roads Administration. Local Roads Administration allows for technical and financial assistance to local governments for construction, maintenance, resurfacing of local roads and bridges. So moving this to Local Roads Administration, it's no longer encumbered under Title 48 or Title 32 that defines LMIG. So basically, a match would not necessarily be required. I did pen a letter to Chairman Dolezal and to the House Transportation Chairman, as well as our appropriations chairs, to say that it is our intent at GDOT to administer that $200 million the exact same way as we do with the LMIG program, based on a formula distribution to the cities and counties, which in effect double what they get in 1 year, exclusive of the match requirement, since it's in this Local Roads Administration. So that is our intent.
And I think the reason y'all are doing this, correct me if I'm wrong, is since we'll be approaching the end of the fiscal year for a lot of these municipalities, the concern would be is that they haven't been able to budget for the match portion, but you still want to be able to do the projects there.
That's
otherwise.
correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct. I had a great conversation with ACCG and GMA, and they walked through the complexities of cities and counties having to budget for that match, and the various and sundry ways that they have to get on commissions and councils, and how long that may take, and just not a lot of time to try to deploy these dollars in Amendment 24.
So apart from the first $100 million that goes to Forsyth County, the rest will be done the same way as LMIG. Is that right?
Sounds like a good plan, Mr. Chairman.
Do want to recognize Senator Lucas for a question.
Let me ask you a question. How do we, I remember I was in the bus business for over 10 years. I go to Florida, and if I ride in the right-hand lane, it was bumpity bump. forgot in the passing lane, smooth sailing. In Georgia, you got in the right lane, smooth sailing anyway. And then, of course, we ended up with I call it the $1 billion road tax bill under Governor Deal. I want to make sure we don't ever get back to what we had to do then in order to make our roads on the interstate. Now, the maintenance on interstate, how is that done? Because we had a problem when we did that $1 billion deal and had the hotel, $5 for hotels, man, to try to get our roads back into the shape and not let them go down again like that. That's one of them. I'd like you to answer that one, then I got one more, and then I'm gonna be through with you.
Okay. Well, I agree with your line of questioning 100%. Is again, continue to invest in state of good repair, of capital maintenance, and being able to rehabilitate or reconstruct. And a lot of our interstates have outlived their service life. If you think about when the interstates were built, most of the concrete pavements were designed to last 30 years. Asphalt pavements designed to last probably 10 to 15. Then you have to keep resurfacing it, right, to build more structure. So a lot of our pavements have outlived their useful life, so to speak. So we're in that stance now where we have to reconstruct and rehabilitate a lot of those pavements. But that is, again, as I said, foundational of what we need to do is take care of what we have first and foremost and keep things in a state of good repair, such that it doesn't matter if you're in the right lane or the left lane, you're not getting the bumpy bump. We want to have good, smooth pavements, which reduces wear and tear on vehicles and what have you. So again, we're still strategically have performance metrics that we look at to make sure that we're making the proper investments so that we get those outcomes that we both agree on.
All right, the other thing is, riding east and west on 16, I've noticed more tractor trailers because you're only between Macon and Savannah, you have the rest station right before you get to Dublin. I'm seeing more tractor trailers parked on the up ramps or going down the ramp because of drive time. They've run out of time to drive. So when you look at Macon, Georgia from Savannah being 165 miles, wouldn't it be better if we could do an inland port that's big enough to handle the traffic, also with a spur tied to Norfolk Southern, where we will be able to take those, I call them trailers, they locked on the back of the trucks, be able to take them off, put them on a rail spur, which will give you time for drivers to complete their log, because if you're going 95 south or 95 north, you go to the port. To get to the middle of Georgia, you got to come up 16 and cut off and go out 75 to get to Byron, Peach County, all of those other small areas, and even Thomaston, Georgia. So would it not be better if we figured out a way to get some of the tractor trailers off the road so I can come to Atlanta, that I drive back and forth every day while we're in session, and not have to worry about a wreck time down the interstate where I can't get up here?
Yeah, we certainly support more freight on rail. A lot of that deals with logistics. The more freight we can get on rail, the better it is for the roads, for the wear and tear, for all the things you just enumerated. So obviously we talk to our friends at the Georgia Ports Authority a lot about what they can rail. A lot of it's just logistics and timing of how long it takes to get the containers on rail and out. And you've got two willing partners, I think, sitting behind me with NS and CSX that would love to see more containers on rail, something to continue to talk about. And of course, as noted, we have a great inland port up in Murray County, one under construction now in Gainesville Hall County that will absolutely take some containers off. But
Well, they need to be big enough, because the one in Cordell didn't do
That's
the fit
Cordell,
right.
yes, sir. Cordell's a little different animal as far as the freight movement there. But something that we have to continue to look at, and I know as the planning director presented this committee, we know that the freight tonnage is almost doubles by 2050. So we've got to be looking at all kind of opportunities to deal with that freight such that you can get back and forth to Macon.
I think your next slide is rail, so that's a good segue.
So, yes, rail. So, just a note of that, while we're on the rail, is the House added $4.25 million to help us work on the short lines, not those NS or CSX routes, but work on the state-owned rail lines for state of good repair. And what we had in the difference between the 6.5 and the 4.25 is a little over $2.3 million for three things. One is every 5 years, each state is required to do a freight rail plan update. So we'll have to do that for the Federal Railroad Administration. So $1 million to match federal funds to update a state rail plan, which may identify some things like Senator Lucas talked about. There's a small amount in that too, of $102,000, that GDOT is responsible for the safety oversight of MARTA's rail system. So the trains, GDOT is actually responsible to respond and to provide state safety oversight for their rail operation by Federal Transit Administration. And the other thing we have was just about $1 million in there for our staff that operates the rail program, because what the green arrow, I want to talk about this green arrow just for a minute. When you see locomotive diesel funds, that again is the sales tax that the railroad operators use for diesel. The sales tax that they pay for diesel actually is appropriated to the department for basically a program to invest in rail. So here's the rail map for the state. I'll call your attention that in Title 48-878, that's where this diesel sales tax appropriation comes from. It requires, 48-878 requires the Commissioner of DOT to set a formula to redistribute those funds for public use for as long as for the rail operators, as long as there's a public interest determination. And it has to be based on how many rail miles that the operators operate on. So, of course, NS and CSX have 67% of the rail track mileage in Georgia. The short line operators have about a third of 33%. So we're actually going through an application process now where Class 1s and short line railroad operators apply for the funds. We make sure that there's a public interest determination that these dollars will do something to either help get freight off the road, get trains onto sidings or spurs so they're not blocking crossings, to try to help rail traffic and vehicular traffic and freight in Georgia. So just a little bit of a nuance I just wanted to remind you for, and we're very appreciative of how these dollars to, again, work on rail investment.
Commissioner, we're about to lose our room here
Okay.
in 90 seconds. So I will ask members of the committee if anybody has a burning question, would give you the room to ask that question.
While they're thinking, I'm just going right to
Sure.
freight, because that was the other big ad in the governor's budget, $641 million for freight program. Due to the redistributions to routine maintenance or to capital maintenance and to some of the other programs, the House ended up at $509.7 million for a new freight program. And we are working diligently to advance projects that would do things just like the 1675 project I talked about, that we could speed that up. We can deal with some of the congestion at the port, such as working on I-16, and looking at other projects around this state that have a freight nexus that we can these dollars absolutely allow us to jumpstart to work on things that we didn't even have in our pipeline. And so the planning director has done a lot of good work with the state freight plan, the Coastal Empire study, multiple other studies like Troup County over where Kia and West Point is, a lot of other studies that we have to pull from that we can absolutely jumpstart and get underway with our freight program. So this is a wonderful addition to our budget, and look forward to keeping you informed as we move forward on what projects come out of that and how much we can jumpstart them.
And just for members of the committee, one thing you may see us adjust in the Senate, I'm heading to Green Door as soon as we adjourn here, we may split those subtractions 50-50 between capital projects and freight, because the House drew down everything that they added didn't really add anything. They just drew it down from freight and added the maintenance and other items. And airport aid, we may do that 50-50 between capital projects. Senator Moore, do you have a question to close this out?
Yeah, Interstate 14, I've been reading about in the news.
Proposed that 20 years ago, Kyle?
And so can you give us an update there? I hear the Georgia Department of Transportation isn't necessarily favorable to the idea.
So obviously, through freight planning, looking out to 2050, it just did not score that well. I'll give you a little bit of a comparison. If you think about going from Columbus to Augusta, to upgrade 316, the road from Gwinnett County to Athens, which is 40 miles, that was about $2 billion of work to do 40 miles, and now you got to do, it's just a huge cost to upgrade to interstate standards. And the federal government, what's probably not understood is the federal government doesn't come in and give you a new bucket of money for I-14. It's just, you would have to use all our federal money for a very long time. And so what came out of the freight plan showed that upgrading existing capacities or putting, even maybe making spot improvements along that corridor could pay a better dividend than trying to convert something that's not an interstate up to interstate standards.
Commissioner, thank you for being here today. Everybody wants to be on transportation, so I want to welcome Senator Estevez for stepping in just for a quick moment. Commissioner, thank you for being here today. Committee members, as a reminder, we have a committee dinner this evening. David Mullering and his team have worked on a great dinner for us. We're grateful for that. If you have any questions or need to RSVP, change an RSVP, Mackenzie is your person. And with this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Commissioner.